Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is now Airwindows PlatinumSlew, as if you thought GoldenSlew wasn't enough. So there's going to be more of this kind of stuff. It has been a work in progress. One of the things that sometimes happens with my stuff is that if I'm going through a series of spaces around this sort of thing, I'm not going to take away previous points along the path. You should get to have the previous ones as well as the new one. For instance, this PlatinumSlew took a bunch of additional coding just last Monday because I was struggling with if you slammed overly intense energy into it, it kind of freaked out. And that applied to the follow-up because all of this is for the purpose of me being able to dial in behavior that acts like classic analog consoles. And I've been doing that on recent tracks as well. Like there's a recent really weird synthetic thing that I did, and the one before, where I was using PlatinumSlew specifically to dial in a top end where the very highest frequencies coming off of my cymbals, tambourines, things like that, were rolled in properly so that it sounded like a mix, so that it sounded like a classic record. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now, and then I'm going to get back to work because I have lots of stuff to do. I might fill you in a little bit on what's coming, but I do have to rush off and continue doing this work. So let's roll that sound again. So, drum recording. Pretty simple drum recording. It's 96K. And we can demonstrate some of the previous plugins, such as Slew. These are all at the same setting. This is now about 0.7. I'll show you more about PlatinumSlew, but for now, these are all set the same. And we've got Slew, and Slew is rolling stuff off a little bit, but it doesn't sound too crazy. Then we have GoldenSlew from last week. And that is beginning to sound a little bit different. Lastly, PlatinumSlew. Now there's some interesting things to notice about all this. One of them is that the PlatinumSlew algorithm, through being adjusted for the purposes of fixing the bugs I was running into, and they were audio bugs, in that if you blasted it too hard, it became upset. Thankfully, I was able to fix that. One of the things that it did is something that I've always looked for in some of my classic slew limiting type stuff. I came up with an algorithm that does slew limiting, which also steps on the lows, the extreme lows. And that's going to be really significant for doing properly retro sounding 70s or earlier sounding versions of console. But PlatinumSlew, you've got that right now. So let's go back to Slew again. You hear that kick drum in there. If we throw a GoldenSlew in, it's got a slightly different character, but it's fairly similar. Then, hear what it's doing to the kick? That's where things get interesting. And I don't have to stop there. I could also throw on the track that I used last time. little heavy music there. This is just slew. And we are doing much more slew restriction than we normally would. I will show you what this sounds like in a moment. Firstly, here's GoldenSlew. Notice that it's capturing the guitars and things in a more convincing and realistic way. Now we throw PlatinumSlew on. Isn't that interesting? Compare that to just the simplest form of slew limiting, which is not restricting anything. So I might let it repeat that while I show how this sounds when dialing it in properly with PlatinumSlew. Let's take PlatinumSlew all the way to 0 and engage it. At this point, it's not doing anything. Listen to what happens as I crunch it down to that point again. Start bringing it in. We're already doing quite a lot here. And now we're just clobbering everything with it. And here we are back where we left off. Or beyond. So you can scrunch this one down to the ground. This one does not actually hang on to DC voltages the way that literal slew can. That is something that is characteristic of this, and I'm going to be bringing out something else that will let you sort of split the difference between these, but this one you can switch down to 0, although it doesn't act the same as, say, doing the same thing with just slew element. So with this one, we're going to be demonstrating maybe a different section. How about just that hat? We'll put it in a place where we can hear what the hat's doing. Or we can go back to the drum kit. That starts stepping on the hat quite aggressively. Or we can again, PlatinumSlew can scrunch it down to practically nothing. But what I was finding in working with actual tracks is that I liked having it just barely engaged. Or if I squish it over to a place where I've got some I can have a place where hi-hats are doing something. And you also tend to hear this effect on the snare, so maybe I can or indeed there's a crash cymbal there, so and then if I bring in a little bit more PlatinumSlew, this is at about 0.3 now. It doesn't come forwards as much in the mix, but it still sounds pretty realistic. And when it hits that crash, it sounds like a record. And then if we switch it back off again, this sounds fine, but it's the top end is coming out more compared to when you bring some of it in or indeed quite a lot of it. That's enough so that it goes kind of dark as it hits. And that's a way that you can get a serious retro feel out of it. Just pull it back enough until it's not squishing things completely. And you'll also notice that it is doing the thing with the kick drum there, where you hear the kick drum as the normal recording here, but then when we begin to introduce PlatinumSlew, it's shaping the kick drum in an interesting way. Well, there you have it. So PlatinumSlew is something that you can have now. I'm already beginning to work with it, which is, my apologies for the motorcycles and things. That's one of the reasons why I can do things like lay down drum tracks, is I'm not the only noise complaint in the neighborhood, so I can get away with it. This is also a reason why I might sometimes want to be recording stuff with my synthesizers or with the guitar into the ISO cab or whatever, is because I can't do things where I'm doing the recording studio thing and then there are kids running around with motorcycles on the street outside, and it's still okay. But for now, you're going to have to live with the noise of motorcycles sometimes going by. Maybe it sounds cool. Maybe if I'm being quiet, you can capture a sound effect off of the YouTube video that way. Speaking of capturing other things, one of the things that I sometimes like to do is put tracks of mine up on another website that I've been getting rolling, and I'm going to continue doing that to the best of my ability. Rather than try to make sample sets, I'm increasingly warming to the idea of just sort of putting everything out there. And, because I have a MediaFire site, so it's a question of, like, if a meteor hit my house and I had only my laptop left, I would want to be able to download, like, my old drum tracks and be putting together music in a different way, maybe in Renoise or something, but still working with the sounds that I'm able to get. And increasingly those sounds include the new plugins that I'm developing. And as I do stuff like the recent song with vocals and harmonies and stuff, I am getting forced into the direction where I'm needing to develop the plugins akin to the classic analog console emulations, because I need to develop those EQs and put them into service to get the sounds that I need. I'm also going to be working on the reverbs. What I'm doing currently is getting used to the sound of the Bricasti and studying it, and I have spent hours upon hours of capturing reference audio of it in all different kinds of settings. And I've come to some conclusions around that, and, well, everything is moving along as well as it can. And I'll talk to you, some of you guys on Monday. Don't mind me getting a little bit flustered and hanging in there pretty well, all things considered. And I'll get back to work. Talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.